same bouquet. One, hey, we are, come on, hey, with everyone. Oh, one, we are with everyone. Oh, it's time to make a pause, to be present, to be more alive. And the calmer we are, the deeper we get love. Back at the job, back at the job, back at the job, back at the job. Hey! Everyone! Hey! Yeah, come on, ladies! Hey, hey! Oh, one, we are with everyone. Oh, we are with everyone. Hey, one, we are with everyone. One, we are with everyone. Oh, one, we are, come on, with on keyboards, Myron McKinley, the music director of Earth, Wind and Fire. Myron came specially from Las Vegas to play tonight to support Marianne Williamson. On drums, Stacy Lamont-Sidnor, the drummer of the Jackson. Please, Stacy Lamont-Sidnor. Stacy came specially from Austin to play tonight to support Marianne Williamson. Yay! On bass, the bass player of Barry Manilow, David Foster, many big stars, Mr. Ian Martin. On vocal, Adam Ajayi Jackson, please. Yeah.
Who's caught in the crossfire? Yeah. Who's caught in the crossfire? Yeah. Who's caught in the crossfire? Yeah. Who's caught in the crossfire?
From New York City, Amanda Holly. She came specially from New York to play for Marianne. Come on, Amanda.
Who's caught in the crossfire? We are one with everyone.
And the star of TikTok, she has 10 million followers. From New York City, Mandy Mahen.
God's leaving clues in his music for us to use as a muse for meditation. Our salvation will peak to his dictation. It's time for a spiritual awakening, responding to audio stimulation. The depth of this thesis increases with wisdom. Our spiritual business has been with us since the beginning. It's time to open wide. We can meditate divine medication. We can generate a higher
Say yeah!
When we are
Say yeah!
with everyone.
Say yeah! My name is Michel Pascal. I am meditation teacher and singer. I live in New York. I just came specially the plane to support Marianne Williamson. Myron. Merci. I will sing a Tibetan mantra to honor Marianne, to honor each of you. Om Mani Padme Hum. In Tibetan it means all I can say, all I can do, all I can think, be full of love, like Marianne said to each of us. Om Mani Padme Hum. 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 Adam.
time has come to shift our perspective. Perception is not knowledge, she said. We cannot change the world from a place of indifference. Our strength is rooted in forgiveness. Connection is the new resistance. A divine surrendering which enables us to face the day with eyes open wide to human suffering. We bear witness to each other's humanity, standing together in dignity because abundance is meant for all of us. Equality is overdue, so we meditate in the morning and kick ass in the afternoon.
Oh, money. Marianne, Stacy. Stacy. Stay. Hey, hey, hey. Come on, come on. Hey. Jump, 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 jump. Make some noise. Make some noise. Make some noise. Make some noise. Sing yeah, 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 Stacy. Yeah. Thank you to each of you. And thank you to Marianne. Thank you for your coming for Marianne. Thank you. Bless you. Thank you for this amazing band.
it was. Happened so naturally. Didn't I know it was love? The next thing I felt was you holding me close. What was I gonna do? I let myself go. And now we fly through the stars. I hope this night will last forever. I've been waiting for you. It's been so long. I knew just what I would do when I heard your song. Fill my heart with
in D.C., with a few brave exceptions, is. I'm Marianne Williamson, and when I was growing up, America had a vibrant middle class. The average American worker had decent benefits, could afford a home, could afford a car, could afford a yearly vacation, could afford for one member of the couple to stay home if they wished, and could afford to send their kids to college. But over the last 50 years, there's been a massive transfer of wealth to the tune of $50 trillion from the bottom 90% of Americans to the top 1%, decimating America's middle class. We all owe President Biden a debt of gratitude for defeating President Trump in 2020. But with the things that they're going to be throwing at us in 2024, we need to submit to the American people an agenda of fundamental economic reform, universal health care, tuition-free colleges at state colleges and universities, higher education including tech schools, paternity and maternity leave, free child care, and a guaranteed living wage. These are things that are considered moderate positions in every other advanced democracy. But in the United States, people have been trained to expect too little. The American people have been played. What the Democratic Party should do is to truly return to the principles of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Not just alleviate people's suffering, but offer them genuine economic reform. Not just help people survive in an unjust system. The Democratic Party should end an unjust system. Washington, D.C., with a few brave exceptions, is filled with two major categories of leaders. Those who don't even care about all the suffering that's going on out there, and those who do not have the moral courage to fix it. Let me in there. I will. I'm Marianne Williamson, and I approve this message.
Hi, everybody. My name is Frances Fisher. I'm so excited to be here back at the Saban to introduce my dear friend, Marianne Williamson. I just have to tell you, we met almost 20 years ago walking the halls of Congress when she had an idea to create a Department of Peace. It was something I'd never even considered before because there was always a Department of War, a Department of Defense then. and a Department of Peace. And look at where we are now. We still need a Department of Peace. We need a president who has tenacity and strength and who can be polling at 11% when nobody is even letting her speak on a national stage. So it's up to all of us, right? It's all up to all of us to spread the word, because Marianne is the most delightful, surprising, and smart woman I have ever met in my life, and I want you to meet her now. Ms. Marianne Williamson. Come to the stage.
Oh, Saban, I love you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I'd like a little light on in the house. I'd like to see all my wonderful friends who are here. I also want to thank, as usual, those of you who are on live stream. I want to thank the wonderful musicians who played for us this evening, Michelle Pascal and Myron McCauley and Stacy Lamont and Ian Martin, and also the marvelous singers. Thank you so, so much. And also I want to thank my bestie, Frances Fisher. Thank you so much, Frances, for introducing me. I'm sorry I was late. I thought you were going to go on with your sweet self. But you got right to the point, and I thank you. I still need a little more light in the house so that I can see. This is a place, I know many of you who are here tonight know that we met here weekly at the Saban for years. And the conversation that we had week after week, and the conversation which I've had with many of you for 40 years, is not a different conversation than the one that we are having on my presidential campaign. I respect, and I think we all respect, that within our public and within our political dialogue in the United States, we keep our language secular. And that's important, because we are a religiously pluralistic society. Separation of church and state, what's so magnificent about it, means people are free to worship how they wish or whether they wish. So it's a very important protection for all of us, for all Americans, that we just keep the conversation in terms of its languaging without religious language. And so if I'm talking to you about running for president, of course we don't break out in prayer or anything like that. But the founders were not seeking to suppress the religious conversation. They were seeking to protect it. And as JFK said, we cannot afford as a country to be materially rich, but spiritually poor. And when you actually, and all that spirituality is, as we know, it's the path of the heart. And so many of us have met in this building and in other places over the years to talk about our lives when we live life from the heart. You know, many of you have heard me talk about Dr. James Doty, the neurosurgeon up at Stanford, who wrote that incredible book called Into the Magic Shop. And Doty talks about the fact that even in neurophysiology, they have discovered now something which even 10 years ago they didn't know, and that is how much of a partnership, even in terms of the intelligence of the body, is forged and played by a connection between the brain and the heart. And so many of us have for years recognized that when we live lives that are heartless, in which we do not consider ethical matters and deeply moral matters that have to do with reverence for life, reverence for the earth, charity and love and generosity towards one another, our lives don't work. And so when you leave such issues of love and mercy and justice and generosity and forgiveness and atonement and amends made for mistakes and kindness, when you leave these things out of your collective experience, then your collective experience doesn't work. And that's what's happened to this country. Not in terms of our personal lives necessarily, many people, our personal lives. We are definitely on the path of seeking to live more ethically and with greater love and just to be better people. But we have lost a sense, particularly over the last few decades, that that conversation pertains to economics as well. It pertains to public policy. It pertains to issues of criminal and racial justice. It pertains to the way we live our lives collectively. And that's why I'm running for president. I didn't change careers. I'm just extending the same things I've talked about for 40 years. How to live a more soulful life, how to live a more reverent life, how to live a more loving life. And I think we need to ask ourselves that, not only in terms of our individual existence, but in terms of our country. This country needs its soul back. This country needs to think in terms of ethics in our policy. This country needs to think in terms of reverence for the earth, reverence for our children, reverence for one another. And until we do, this country won't work. We need a president who knows that and who will say so. Now, I know that we all know here that just as I was saying, we get down and we get real and we get deep when it comes to our personal relationships. I always say when I'm traveling internationally, I always say I hope I get to sit next to an American on that airplane ride from this place or that place. Why do I say that? Because it's a characterological facet of the American that we get right to it and get real and get personal and talk about what's really going on in our lives. And some people don't like it. I like it. But when it comes to our public conversations, particularly about politics, we've all been trained to keep it superficial and to keep it shallow. We've all been trained to sort of think like sixth graders. We've all been trained to just repeat shallow, cheap, stale narratives that are handed down to us by our political party or our particular ideological silo. This is not the time for that. This is not the time to be farming out our best thinking. This is not the time to not be applying to our collective experience the deeper understanding of psychological and life dynamics that we know apply to our personal lives. After all that a nation is a group of people. So the same issues, the same dynamics, the same underlying internal dynamics that apply to our personal lives also apply to our country. And if we want to heal our country, if our country is wounded, then we have to do the same thing for our country that we do for our own personal lives when we're in trouble. We have to be willing to look in the mirror. We have to ask ourselves, who am I? And what are the principles that guide my existence? What do I believe in? And am I standing on that? Am I standing on something higher than just me, getting what I want all the time? And who is me, for that matter? So I think that those of us, and I've been saying this for years, many of you have heard me say this, those of us who have a clue what changes one life, we're the last people who should be sitting out the social and political and economic questions of our day. Because if you have a clue what changes one life, you're the one who has a clue, you're the one who has a contribution to make to the process of healing our country. I'll even go further than that. Those who don't have a clue shouldn't be there any longer. Now, one of those issues of personal transformation has to do with the individuation process. You get to a point in your life, usually your 20s or so, where you are individuating to the fullness of your mature self. And in order to do so, you start asking questions. You start asking questions about where you come from, who your parents were, who your grandparents were, what's the history of your people, what's the history of your religion, what's the history of your tribe. You need to understand where things have been in order to understand where you fit in. And then when you understand where you fit into what was, you're like, now you have an idea not only where you fit into the past, but what your responsibility is to the future. So every generation has to do that. Every generation has to understand, not just as individuals, what was my family's history, but what was our collective history. And so I'd like to go through some of that with you tonight. This country was born in 1776. It was born on July 4, 1776, when 56 very brave men signed the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence is America's mission statement. It's important, a mission statement, but it doesn't mean anything if you don't revisit it. It doesn't mean anything if you don't allow it in, if you don't deeply consider its purpose and its meaning in your lives. In the Jewish religion, it says that every generation must rediscover God for itself. And every generation of Americans has to rediscover for ourselves what the Declaration of Independence means for us, not just what it meant in 1776, but what does it mean today? It's not enough that the words be inscribed on marble walls somewhere or written in parchment underneath glass in a museum. They have to live in our hearts, or they lose their life force. They lose their moral force. And so let's go back to discover the radicalism and the deeper meaning of what happened that day in order to understand the radicalism that is needed to solve our country today. In 1776, some very brave men signed that document. They were brave, I say, because if in fact the British had won the war, they all would have been hanged, presumably, as traitors against the King of England. And with that document, they infused into the founding of a country earth-shattering ideas that would and did change the world. They are 4 very radical principles. They were radical in 1776, and they're radical today. Number 1, we take these truths to be self-evident, it says, that all men are created equal. Now, I remember when in elementary school or junior high school, whenever, being taught about the divine right of kings, that God had given power to the king. And then the king had some rich friends, cronies, the aristocracy, and they had the rights, it was just simply understood for centuries. They have the rights. They're entitled to the resources. They're entitled to the power. They're entitled to everything, and everybody else is little more than a serf, stuck in a position where they basically serve the king and the aristocracy. With the Declaration of Independence, we turned that over on its head and said, no, all men are created equal. And all men, not just a few men, have inalienable rights of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Now, this was 1776, so what language would we use today for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? I think it would be self-actualization. All men have the right to self-actualize, to do what you want to do, be who you want to be, spread your wings, manifest whatever. If you don't hurt anybody else, go for it. This is the place for you. Now, the document gets even more radical. It says that governments are instituted to secure those rights, not to limit those rights, not to chip away at those rights, not to thwart those rights, not to undercut those rights. Governments are instituted to secure those rights. And then it even says that if government is not doing its job, it is the right of the people to alter it or to abolish it. Now, you're all applauding because, wow, wouldn't it be amazing if that was true here? Hello. So the point is, that was, as I've said several times already, radical in 1776 and radical today. It infused a nation with these principles. There was an opening of a space of possibility that has literally, in many ways, illumined the world. Now, that's where it began, but that's also where it got quite gnarly. Because, as we know, out of the 56 signers of that document, 41 of them were slave owners. So wait a minute, what does that mean? It means that we have always been both and. It means that the American story is inherently a dichotomy. It means that it is baked into the cake here, this kind of bipolarity between two forces. And these forces have been present in every generation from the beginning, and we're going to talk tonight about the fact that they are present today. They have always been with us. One force, people whose minds and hearts are ablaze, illumined with what that means. That wow, there could be a place where anybody can do whatever they want to do and be whoever they want to be. And whatever is life for them, whatever is liberty, they have the liberty to be, whatever pursues happiness, as long as it doesn't hurt anybody else, and the government actually protects that. and that government's there to secure that, and if people don't like it, the people can change that. Like, wow. There are people who've been ablaze with that, and there have been people throughout our history who've been struggling for that and willing to sacrifice for that and even willing to die for that. But there have always been, as well, forces who, let's be very clear, for their own ideological and or financial purposes, had no intention whatsoever of seeing those principles made manifest, who valued their property rights over the rights of democracy and humanitarian values that are inherent in the Declaration of Independence, and have proven time and time again that they would do whatever it took to protect their property rights, their money, and their ideological tendencies over and above the actual principles that anyone should be able to experience life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's who we are. That struggle is who we are, and every generation reiterates the struggle. So then you look at our history and you go, well, what did we do with that generation after generation? And you go, well, actually, we've done pretty well. Generations have risen up. And when there were institutional realities that represented the interests of those who put property rights above human rights, property rights above democracy, property rights against the values of humanity, generations have risen up and pushed back because they knew what Abraham Lincoln would one day say when he said that that Declaration of Independence is an eternal rebuke against all forces of tyranny and repression. So we did answer slavery. We answered it with amendments to the Constitution and the Civil War and the abolition of slavery. We did answer the institutional suppression of women with the generation that rose up with the women's suffragist movement and the passage of the 19th Amendment. And we did rise up, a generation did rise up to the economic tyranny represented by the Gilded Age with the establishment of organized labor. And a generation did rise up against institutional oppression of black people in the American South and segregation. They rose up with the Civil Rights Movement. They desegregated the American South. They passed the Voting Rights Act and they passed the Civil Rights Act. Why am I running for president? Because it's our turn now. But today, it's not a particular institutional reality. It's an economic paradigm. It's a way of looking at things. It's an economic worldview that has now infested. It is like a plague. It is like a cancer on our society. It is the very idea of institutionalized corporate greed. It is a malevolent strain of vulture capitalism whose tentacles are now in every corner of our society. It is a corporate matrix made up of insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies, big food companies, big chemical companies, big agricultural companies, big banks, at times big tech companies, gun manufacturers, big oil and defense contractors. And time and time and time again, their profits come before your life. Their profit come before your health. Their profits. We are the only advanced democracy that does not have universal health care. We have 1 in 4 Americans living with medical debt, 18 million Americans who cannot afford the prescriptions that their doctors give them, 85 million Americans who are underinsured or uninsured. Yeah, they can go to their doctor, but they can't afford the treatment, they can't afford the medicine, they can't afford the operation, so they end up putting GoFundMe pages on the internet for a life-saving operation for themselves or for their children, only because of the greed of insurance companies. We have 1.3 million Americans rationing their insulin, something you don't have in any other advanced democracy since they have universal health care. Rationing their insulin, deciding whether to pay their rent or to pay their insulin, only because of the greed of the pharmaceutical companies, carcinogens in our food because of the greed of big food companies, the rape of the earth because of the greed of big agricultural companies. pesticides in our food, chemicals in our pesticides that we know harming a child's brain because of chemical companies. No matter whether you have a Democratic president or a Republican president, they line up with big oil, and we are actually ramping up fossil fuel extraction when we should be ramping it down. No matter who they are, they go lockstep with the military-industrial complex to the tune of $858 billion, even though we know that the defense industry just price gouges the Pentagon and uses it as their piggy bank. At what point is this going to stop, you ask? Well, not if you keep voting for those guys, because it is now built into the cake. That is the status quo in America today. Washington has been turned into a system of legalized bribery, and our legislators, and indeed sometimes our presidents, in issue after issue after issue, do more to provide more short-term profit maximization for those who already have capital so that they can accumulate more capital at the expense of the majority of Americans who are simply struggling to survive. 70% of Americans who live with constant economic anxiety. The fact that the majority of Americans cannot afford a $1,000 unexpected expenditure. The fact that over the last 50 years, there's been a $50 trillion, that's a pretty massive transfer of wealth, out of the hands of 90% of the American people. In the 1970s, the average American could afford, had decent benefits and could afford a house. The average American worker could afford a house. The average American worker could afford a vacation every year. The average American worker could afford a car. The average American couple could afford for one parent to stay home if they wanted and take care of the children. The average American worker could afford to send their kids to college. We had, until the 1970s, in University of California, University of Texas, University of Florida, and other places as well, tuition-free college and tech school, which they have in every other advanced democracy. Subsidized childcare, paid family leave, guaranteed sick pay, guaranteed living wage. These are considered moderate positions in every other advanced democracy. But our government is now hostage to the new aristocracy, the corporate aristocracy. And this will not change unless we change it. And if we revisit the Declaration of Independence, it says that it is the right of the people to do that. Every time some DNC official or some politician looks at me as though to say, who let you in here? You know what my answer is? James Madison let me in here with a little help from Susan B. Anthony. Thomas Jefferson with the Declaration of Independence, James Madison with the Constitution, and Susan B. Anthony. But we have been trained to give up our thinking to them. We have been trained to farm out our best thinking to them. We would never allow ourselves to be abused like this in our personal lives. We set boundaries in our personal lives. We don't allow that kind of thing in our personal lives, but we're displacing our upset in many cases. Why is it that we are allowing this for ourselves as our collective when this is affecting the lives of our children? This is affecting our health. Carcinogens in our food, forever chemicals in 46% of the water wells in urban America, toxins in our air. What we're doing to the earth, we're 6 inches from the cliff. We're headed straight towards that iceberg. Whether the iceberg is a climate catastrophe, whether the iceberg is an AI catastrophe, whether the iceberg is a nuclear catastrophe. And you've got one major political party just headed right there, and another major political party, under its corporate establishment leadership, moving there more slowly, and they will hit it at a different angle. I say we turn this ship around. We have to turn this ship around. And they would say, oh no, you poor people, you just don't understand. She's not qualified. Because to them, what they call qualified is someone whose career has been ensconced driving the car that just drove us into a ditch. Their idea of qualified means someone qualified to perpetuate and maintain the system as it is. I say qualification should be someone who sees and is willing to articulate and do something about disrupting that system because it's wrong. And that's exactly what I mean. I'm doing the same thing I've been doing for 40 years. But you know, I remember reading an article about myself years ago when they said something about me in terms of my work with Course in Miracles and so forth that I think is true now. This article said, Marianne Williamson isn't saying anything everybody else isn't saying. She just says it when the microphone is on. And I think it's true politically as well. I haven't told you anything you don't already know. I haven't said anything here tonight that's a surprise to anyone. I mean, maybe there was a detail here or a statistic there that you hadn't heard, but everybody knows this. Everybody knows that something's wrong at the center of things. But we also know that, as Einstein said, we will not solve the problems of the world from the level of thinking we were at when we created them. All of the problems that we're talking about here are products of bad economic thinking left over from the 20th century. People whose careers and mindset are ensconced in the mechanistic mindset of the 20th century, in which if you want to solve a problem, you think it's enough to just solve the symptom and not even ask yourself what the root cause is. These are not the drivers of a path to recreation, revitalization, and regeneration in America. We need 21st century thinking where we're looking at the root causes. We're looking at the underlying dynamics. We understand what happened here 50, 40 years ago, when trickle-down economics, the biggest con that has ever been played upon the mind of Americans, came into ascent in this country. And people were told, oh, this will be great, see? Let's just make sure that the stockholders in these major corporations get as much money as possible, and the CEOs too. Let's just make sure they get as much money as possible, and then this incredible thing is going to happen, we were told. They're going to create more jobs. And it's going to be so great. They're going to create so many jobs with all this money that they have. And all that money is going to trickle down to everybody else, and it will just lift all boats. Well, after 40 or 50 years, I think it's clear. It not only didn't lift all boats, it threw people out of the boats that they were already in. And it left millions and millions of people without even a life vest. Before Ronald Reagan was president, before the 1980s, it was illegal, these stock buybacks. And it was illegal for CEOs to be paid with stock options. These things meant that there was this squeezing from every stakeholder other than the stockholders. All this accumulation of wealth in tax policy after tax policy, demonization of unions after more squashing of unions. All these ways that all the money was put in the hands of the stockholders at the expense of other stakeholders, like the workers, like the community, like the environment, meant that all this money would be accumulated in the hands of a very few, and the issue is their business model was never job creation. Their business model was job elimination and worker exploitation. And we should do, as a collective, what any of us would do if we were treated that wrongly in our personal lives and say, excuse me, enough is enough. And yes, I understand that a Republican president started it, but I have to tell you something, no Democratic president has really stopped it yet. And so what we need to do now is to intervene. Just like we would intervene with a friend who was drinking too much or was taking drugs too much. We know that people can die, that there's no guarantee that your physical body will survive with abuse through immoderate drugs or abuse through immoderate use of alcohol. That's when probably everybody in this room has either made the call or had someone make the call to you. Do you think we ought to do something? We all know what that means. That means we saw that person fall down the stairs, or we saw that person take their child in the car when they were completely drunk or they were completely stoned, and we go, oh my God, they're driving, and they're driving with the child. We've seen too much, and we know we need to intervene because we know they could die. They could kill someone. We need to intervene in our country right now because you cannot, we're still stuck in this magical thinking about democracy. We're still stuck the way the drunk is or where the alcoholic is, the way the drug addict is. Oh, it'll be okay. And I'm here to tell you, not necessarily. You cannot abuse your democracy and think that just somebody will handle it. Somebody will handle it because the people we thought would handle it have been co-opted as an institution, not as individuals. You know, I live in Washington, D.C. now, and there's some very nice people there. This is not about nice people versus not nice people. Not every rich person is a greedy bastard. Not every poor person is holy and pure. This is not personal. And even in that kind of oppositional thinking, good versus, that's not where we need to be. But we have to realize that all people are innocent, but some systems are really evil. And so what we need to do now is to recognize that the system must change. But to say the system must change, we don't mean to deviate from how it was originally set up by our founders. It means to go back to how it was with our founders. That's what abolition represented. That's what women's suffrage represented. That's what the labor movement represents. That's what the civil rights movement represented. It meant we're going to go back to the original idea. All men have inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So enough with your carcinogens in our food, and enough with your toxins in our air, and enough with what you're doing with the earth, and enough with fighting wars that we're not really sure have anything to do with our own interests or even the interests of anyone else. We, the people, say no more. Oh, but how would she do that? She has no experience, say the people who spend half their time on the phone raising money. She's not a political car mechanic, is what they're saying. But the problem is not that we don't have enough car mechanics. The problem is we're on the wrong road. Franklin Roosevelt said that we wouldn't have to worry about a fascist takeover as long as democracy delivered on its promises. Some people have said to me, "Oh, Marianne, I don't know what you're doing. Don't you understand the fascists are at the door?" I want you to know I'm doing this because the fascists are at the door. Every time somebody says, "Oh, Marianne, we absolutely have to line up behind Biden, and I think it's very irresponsible what you're doing, and you just don't understand the fascists are at the door." You know what I say to that person every single time I'm told that? Let me guess. This is just a guess that I have. You have health care. You can afford to send your kids to college, can't you? I bet you can live on just one job, and I bet you make more than $15 an hour. Because people who think it's as simple as, no, we're all going to just line up behind one person because the DNC says that's what we should do, not even, just even leaving aside the fact that maybe that's not as logical as it sounds, also might understand what's it going to take to beat the fascists. I think what it's going to take to beat the fascists is what Franklin Roosevelt said. If you say, as he said, that the only way to make sure there would be no fascist takeover is to make sure that democracy delivers on its blessings, then you would say, well, then we better get health care really quick. That's what it means for democracy to deliver on its promises, that you would have universal health care like in every other advanced democracy. You would have tuition-free college and tech school like in every other advanced democracy. Would get rid of those college loan debts because they should never have existed like in every other advanced democracy. You would have subsidized child care like in every other advanced democracy. You would have paid family leave like in every other advanced democracy. You would have a guaranteed living wage like in every other advanced democracy. And then people would say, life's so good with democracy, why would I look anywhere else? Those of you who are Democrats, or if you're Republicans or independents, but for whatever reason you wish not to see Donald Trump back in the White House, I'd like to submit to you my belief that the real electoral danger for the Democrats in 2024 is not Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a symptom, he is not a cause. He is a symptom of this institutionalized corporate greed I've been talking about all night that made so many people desperate, and in large groups of desperate people, they become a petri dish out of which all manner of societal dysfunction is inevitable. And those people who feel that rage and express it outward, we know what they do, but people who feel the rage and express it inward just get depressed. They get anxious. They become addicted, and in many cases, they kill themselves. There is too much misery in this country. Too many people's lives are falling apart. I remember here in this city, we showed up for AIDS. We showed up, the city showed up. And I've seen in time after time, many of us have, and we've done it together. Somebody got the test results back, and it was bad. It was cancer. It was AIDS. Somebody going bankrupt. So somebody hearing that their child was addicted. Many people in this city, we've done it together. We showed up for people whose lives were in trouble. And you've given me such a beautiful career that I've had the privilege to be there with so many of you in the darkest hours of your lives. However, it was only supposed to be an exception and not a rule. And what happened when I left Los Angeles, particularly when I lived in places like Detroit, I went, oh my God, this kind of anxiety, this kind of despair is not an exception, it's a rule in people's lives. And I realized how many times, and in many cases, that kind of despair is a rule because of bad public policy, because they don't have health care, because their kids don't have decent schools, because they can't work on just one job. When the president said, oh, the COVID emergency is over, well, the screaming emergency was over. So when he said, go back to your lives, the emergency is over, for millions of people, life was already an emergency. Poverty is an emergency. Hunger is an emergency. Living a life where you feel locked in and you're working 3 jobs and you hate them all and you have no bandwidth for anything else, for your kids, for your partner. You can't, just living life is just getting up and just hoping you can make it through another day. That is an emotional and psychological emergency, and it is unsustainable. Marianne Williamson, I'm telling you, it's unsustainable. And what has happened is it causes all kinds of rumblings underneath the surface, and it is going to break. It is going to break in one direction or the other. It's either going to break in the direction of greater democracy and justice and course correction and cutting the cords of this aberrational chapter of American history dominated by this soulless, unethical form of capitalism. Not that I'm an anti-capitalist. We don't have to go there. This is a form. This is a strain. It is unworthy. It is what, this is what Louis Brandeis meant, the late Supreme Court Justice, when he said you can have large amounts of money concentrated in the hands of a few, or you can have democracy. You can't have both. You can't have just a few people able to thrive, only a relatively few able to have easy access to health care, a relative few who have easy access to education. This is why what's going on with this regeneration, revitalization of the labor movement, good on you workers, good on you actors, good on you UAW, good on you Amazon, good on you, because that is part of the formula. It has to be an outside and an inside approach. We must correct this thing. That's why this rebirth of labor is so important. It is correcting this malevolence, this malfunction of the way our economy operates. But we can't leave electoral politics out of it. It has to be an outside-inside approach. And a very, very good idea would have a president willing to say this stuff and to lay it down and to be as willing as your president to be as honest and authentic about what's happening in this country as I am as a candidate. And you would say over and over again, oh, there she goes. Well, at least she told us she was going to do that. She was going to make sure that the next defense secretary was not a former board member at Raytheon. And she was going to make sure that no representatives of big ag were going to be in the agriculture department. And she was going to say we should have an economic bill of rights, which guarantees all those things that I've talked about that form a new economic beginning. And we should have a Department of Peace so that we wage peace as effectively as we have learned to wage war when we feel war is necessary. And we should have a Department of Children and Youth, because we have millions of children. We have children. Do you know, throughout this country, I have met principals at elementary schools who tell me that they have students in their school on suicide watch. We have children in this country who are traumatized before kindergarten. We have millions of American children who go to school places where they don't even have the adequate resources to teach a child to read. And if a child cannot learn to read by the age of 10, the chances of high school graduation are drastically decreased. The chances of incarceration are drastically increased. And yet these people are simply locked out as children. And then we talk about things like trauma-informed education, all of which is important, but it's also important that we ask ourselves, why is childhood a trauma for so many children? Well, children aren't old enough to vote, so they're not a constituency, so politicians go, whatever. Children aren't old enough to work, so they have no financial leverage, so politicians go, whatever. They are collateral damage of all this. You think we have a mental health crisis now? Wait 10 years when you have a generation coming into maturity who, when they were in elementary school, prayed every day, dear God, please don't let anybody kill me in my classroom today. So we need to have a Department of Children and Youth. They know things now that they didn't even know 10 years ago about a developing child's brain. 90% of a child's brain is formed before the age of 5. So we have to look at early childhood. I want to convene the best minds. You know, this is the interesting thing. Everything that I've talked about tonight, including so many things we have not talked about, having to do with criminal justice, having to do with race, having to do with so many of the issues that we know are plaguing our society. It's not like we don't have solutions. It's not like we don't have brilliant people who know how to repair lives, prepare systems, repair the earth. We have people, many of them here. California is filled with them. Every state is filled with them. We have the people who know what to do if we were to begin a season of repair. If we were to initiate a real new beginning, a new chapter of American history. We have people who have the solutions. The problem is, the people who have the solutions don't have the power. And people who have the power too often don't really want to hear from people who have the solution, because those solutions would not necessarily increase short-term profits for the politicians' donors. Now, they might do with, I don't know, save our democracy, save people's lives, save people's bodies, save the earth, and save the possibility of our thriving and even survival over the next 100 years. When I have a visual of, well, Marianne, if you become president, what does it look like? This is the visual I see. I'm in the Oval Office, and I open all the doors, and I open all the windows, and I say to all the people out there who are actually providing the alternatives, who are actually providing the solutions, and I say, come on in, guys, we have it for 4 years. We have it, come on in, come on in, come on in. We got this place. I got some levers of power here. Come on in. We got some levers of power here. We can appoint the people to these agencies so that they're not captured by corporate interests. And we can lay out for the American people a real vision. As Franklin Roosevelt said, the main power of the presidency, he said, is not administrative, it's a moral vision. Moral leadership, he said. We don't need another technocrat. We need a vision, the original vision that is in the bloodstream of the American idea. I'm not the greatest visionary in America, but I'm the only one running for the Democratic nomination for president. And I would also have the power of executive orders. And I would also have the power of the bully pulpit. And like I said to you already, I'd lay it down. I'd lay it down in a State of the Union address. I'd mention poor children. I'd mention in a State of the Union that we have the highest level of poverty of any advanced democracy. I would mention the fact that there are young people, a high percentage of young people going to community colleges in California as well as everywhere else, living out of their car. I would mention how many people are unhoused in this country who actually work full-time. I would mention the misery. I would mention the uninsured. I would not peripheralize the fact that there is so much ubiquitous suffering. And I have lived in Washington, and even though there are some nice people and well-intentioned people, I had always heard it was a bubble. No, it's more than a bubble. It's like a walled city. It's like people who are so emotionally buffered from the reality of most people's lives. I have a friend who told me a story. I'm not going to tell you which president this was, because it doesn't really matter. She'd worked for his campaign. So she was very excited because when he won, she was hired to work in the administration. She said one day she was in the Oval Office, and one of the president's economic advisors, they were talking about some issue, some policy, and the man said something, well, you know, what difference really would this make? I mean, maybe it would save people $300 a month. And she stood up. And she said, I'm out of here. Because if people in the Oval Office don't know what $300 a month would do for the majority of people in this country, then we're on the wrong road. Something's very, very wrong. Very, very wrong. And those who are so emotionally buffered, I hope they have lovely lives, but they should not be running this country. But, as you can imagine, the institutional resistance to everything I'm saying is very strong. They don't assassinate today, but they character assassinate. There's a viciousness there. they'll do, if they don't want you in the conversation, all of a sudden you're not on CNN. If they don't want you in the conversation, all of a sudden you're not on MSNBC. You might have higher poll numbers than Vivek Ramaswamy. You might have higher poll numbers than Nikki Haley, but those guys are on the Sunday news shows all the time. Those guys are on those television shows all the time. What gives here? Well, what gives here is that it is a cabal. It is a political media industrial complex, and they have their idea of who they consider qualified to drive this car, which means qualified to perpetuate and maintain their power. It is time to repudiate their power. And I'm trying, actually. I'm trying, and actually, to be honest, 11% in the poll today at USA Today, the 10%. To anybody in this room or anybody on live stream who has donated even $1 to this campaign, all that applause is for you. Thank you. We have a great campaign actually now. We just need to scale up. And that's difficult, you know. President Biden had a $25 million ad buy a couple of weeks ago. The point being that at this point the resistance is so great. And the reason I mention those poll numbers is because to have achieved those poll numbers in the middle of a media blackout, good on us, if I may say so. But now we need to keep going. Because the way the system works, what do they say? First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they attack you, and then you win. And the attacks are strong, and the minimization is strong, and the invisibilization is strong, and the erasure is strong, and all of that. And as you can imagine, the spirit, you know, somebody said to me just yesterday, what would Marianne Williamson say? And, you know, it's funny because Marianne Williamson would say only love is real and nothing else exists, and you have to rise above it and blah, blah. But some days I feel like I had a fight with a boyfriend many years ago, and we were going through something, and he started reading to me from one of my books or something, and I said to him, I don't care what Marianne Williamson. And you can imagine, what I go through sometimes. However, I think that this is an important issue, not just for me. We have to ask, in order to endure and to transform these times, we have to ask more than what do we do. We have to ask, who do we need to be? When Gandhi said you must be the change, it goes back to that Einstein quote. You have to be a different person. You have to think differently, and we have to act differently in order to endure and genuinely, fundamentally transform these times. The system is institutionally resistant to fundamental economic reform. We are talking about billions and billions and billions of people's dollars. This is the same thing going back to slavery. Property rights over human rights. Property rights over democratic rights. That is why an economist named James Buchanan, who was the muse for the Koch brothers, he said that in order to ensure property rights, the primacy of property rights, he said we must put democracy in chains. And that's exactly what they have done. And in my mind, candidate suppression is a form of voter suppression. So we have to ask ourselves, well, who do we need to be in order to move this thing? What do we need to be? Well, first of all, we need to toughen up, please. You know, people say, well, the whole thing is just so traumatizing. Do you think the people who walked across the bridge at Selma were not traumatized? Do you think the women who marched for suffrage, that was all they were marching for women to be able to vote? And for this crime, they were thrown into prison. And the conditions in the prison were so horrible that they went on hunger strike. And the response of the prison officials was to send men into their cells and force these metal contraptions over their necks, force feed them. Don't you think they were a little anxious? As a friend of mine said to me, and he really just changed my life that moment, I was complaining. It was before I even decided whether or not to run, and I was complaining about this or that, and they this or they that, and he just texted me back, toughen up, Buttercup. Toughen up, Buttercup. We have become too precious. We've become too precious. You know, we need to stage American Revolution 2.0, and that is a revolution of consciousness, and that is a revolution at the ballot box, and that cannot be done over white wine and brie. We have to be brave. We have to be courageous. We have to think for ourselves. We have to answer stupid things people say with something smart. We have to be willing to lay out the case for how much change is really necessary and how illogical it is to think that this race in 2024 is going to be like 2020. It's not. It's going to be like 2016. The biggest risk for the Democrats or anybody who doesn't wish to see Donald Trump return to the White House in 2024 is not Donald Trump. It's how many people might just stay home. Because if people don't feel that there's really an alternative, if they don't have a visceral sense, boy, my life might change, I might get health care, I might be able to send my kids to college, I might make a living wage, I might be able to get out of my car. If people don't feel that, people are numbed and dumbed down and kind of like they're just too depressed. Why would they even show up? People who stood an hour for 7 hours in order to vote for a president who said that he'd give you $2,000 and then he only gave you $1,600, or who said that he would raise the minimum wage and then quite couldn't get to that because of the parliamentarian wouldn't allow it. Let me tell you something. When the president said he would raise the minimum wage to $15, and then he did do that for the federal workers. And when it came time to put that $15 into the COVID relief bill, the parliamentarian said, oh, you can't do that. So let me give you a little bit of schooling, perhaps, in how Washington works. The parliamentarian has no actual political power, and no Republican president would allow himself to be stopped by the parliamentarian. When the parliamentarian challenged George Bush, he fired the parliamentarian. We need an advocate for the people. We need the Democratic Party to once again, live with unequivocal advocacy for the working people of the United States and for what we are in our lives and our children's lives. But the institutional resistance is strong. And if we are going to do more than just get the message out there, I wouldn't be going through the shit I go through every day just to get a message out. This is not just, if all we do is get the message out there, all we do is make incremental approach, then what I submit to you with all sincerity is that it is unreasonable for us to assume that our democracy will even make it. And it is reasonable for us to at least consider, I'm just asking you to consider, that maybe the candidate that the DNC says is the only one we should be supporting might not in fact be the strongest candidate to show up in opposition to Donald Trump in 2024. Could we just have the conversation? Could we just open ourselves to the conversation? And you should hear what Joe Biden has to say, what he wants for the next 4 years. So far, all I've heard is to finish the job. I don't know, maybe there's more on his website I haven't seen. Listen to what he says, listen to what I say, listen to what Cornel West says, listen to what Bobby Kennedy says, listen to what the Republicans say. You know, we have to be open now. Politics should be about anybody have any good ideas? You have any good ideas? You have any good ideas? That's what a vibrant democracy is. And you owe it to yourselves to listen, to not just accept what handed down narrative is given you about anything, including Israel and Palestine, by the way. Think for yourself. Read. Listen. Go deep. Cry. Cry for all that has gone wrong. And then pray in your own way to the God of your understanding, whether you think of these things in secular terms or religious terms or spiritual terms. There have been miraculous breakthroughs in this country. Surely the abolitionists had difficult days. Surely the women's suffragists had desperate days. Surely the early labor organizers had horrible days. Surely the civil rights movement, there were desperate times. But those people continued. They were not guaranteed success. No one told me. Everybody said, what do you do? You're not going to be able to overthrow. You're not going to be able to stop slavery. You're not going to be able to get women the right to vote. You're not going to be able to do any of that. But they didn't persevere because they knew they would be successful. They persevered because they knew it was the right thing to do. And they persevered because they knew on some level that this was bigger than them. A well-lived life isn't just about you. The American dream isn't just about that you can get what you want, or you can get what you want, or I can get what I want. The American dream is a treasure. It is a sacred ideal that all of us that gives not only of us profound rights that must be protected, but also profound responsibilities. And our responsibility is to protect those rights and to expand those rights. And this is our time. And we were called upon to do what our ancestors did. And as Abraham Lincoln said, as our case is new, we must think anew, and we must act anew. And we must break the cord with an aberrational chapter of American history. We must bring forth something new. We need to be hospice workers and death doulas to a world that needs to pass away, and birth doulas and midwives to a world that is struggling to be born. That's why we're tired, and that's why we're weary, because we know that something's not really working. And when something's not really working, the message is, well, you go work it. That's what I want to do. And that's what I thank all of you for, because you're helping me do that. This is not the old-fashioned, leadership model. This is not about something dictated from above. This is about holding the space for the brilliance of all of us. That's why Jefferson said the only safe repository is in the hands of the people. I'm not somebody saying to you, send me to Washington and I'll fight for you. I don't want to go to Washington and fight for you, but I'd love to go to Washington and co-create with you something beautiful for ourselves, for our children. Let us envision it. Let us start with the vision and reverse engineer from there. Let us have a vision of a repaired earth, a vision of a repaired democracy, a vision of a revitalized people, a revision of a compassionate but powerful setting things right that have been made wrong, a vision of a world at peace, a vision of a world 100 years from now. John Kennedy said, if we don't get rid of war, war will get rid of us. People say, when I say things like, we could actually, if we love each other enough, incredible things could happen, and we could actually create a world at peace. And all the pseudo-sophisticates who dominate this situation, they would say, oh, that's so naive. So naive. Let me tell you what's naive. What's naive is to think that our democracy will survive and the planet itself will be habitable in another 100 years if we do not at least try. I hope you'll consider, vote for me. Let's try together. Thank you very much. Thank you. 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 I am so grateful to all of you, and it's so wonderful to be here at the Saban with the live stream audience as well. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. For those of you who are not already participants in the campaign, I hope that you go to Marianne2024.com. Make sure you're on the list. Make sure if you have the time, please volunteer. And if you have the time, if you have the ability, please, $3 matters. There are those who are giving $3, supporting us with $3 a month. Anything you can do. Now, I want to introduce you to a friend of mine who many of you know, Ryan Weiss, who is here somewhere. Hey, hi, darling. Ryan Weiss is, actually, how many years have I known you here at the Saban? I met you here at the Saban.
I met you at a dinner party at Sophie Shisha's house,
Really?
13 years ago.
Really?
Yeah.
Because I remember you asking a question here. And,
Always.
And I have watched you actually become kind of a big mocker coach.
Okay.
All that kind of stuff that you do. And there was a fundraiser, and I asked Ryan to speak. It was months ago before we even officially started. And the way you spoke and the way you talked about sort of how you saw the purpose of this campaign was very, very moving to me. And I've asked Ryan if he'd say a few words to you now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan.
Let's hear it for Marianne Williamson. So while Marianne was speaking, there were a couple of things that I was thinking about. One is that personally, I recently had a family member go through a life-threatening illness that was very scary. And as she was going through the grief and going through the pain and going through the trauma of that experience, once she mourned a lot of that, she used that experience as like a wake-up call. She realized that at this moment where she was facing potentially the destruction of her health and her vitality, that this was a moment that she could wake up and make new choices. And I kind of see that that's where our country is at, and that's where our democracy is at. We have an opportunity to make new choices and to wake up. And for me personally, there's no one else on the planet that I'd rather have in the seat at the Oval Office and the loudest microphone in the world to lead us into that awakening than Marianne Williamson. That's the first thing. The other thing that I was thinking about was a moment, I think 10 years ago, when I was on the border of Syria. I was on this trip, and it was the first time in my life that I heard the sounds of war, that I heard bombs going off, and I heard machine guns going off, and my whole body was rattled, and I didn't know what to do. And I went back to where I was staying that night, and I called Marianne, and I said, what do I do? What do I do? Innocent people are dying. What do we do? How do we help solve this conflict in Syria? And Marianne said, Ryan, hold on. Take a breath. And she said, here's what you have to do. She said, you need to let your heart break open right now to feel the pain of the mother who's holding her child who she just lost. And once you allow yourself to feel the depth of that pain of that woman, your heart will tell you what to do. And that is when I learned compassion. And that is when I saw this is the woman that I want to see in the Oval Office, at the loudest microphone in the world, making decisions that impact people's lives every single day, because she is a woman who lets her heart break open to the pain that people are experiencing in this country every day. And that depth of compassion must motivate where we move our country forward. But here's the thing. Here's what's really cool, actually, is you don't see what I get to see and what Frances gets to see and what Marianne's friends get to see who talk to her on the regular. The amount of work that Marianne and this campaign are putting in every single day to drive this car to the White House is unbelievable. The fact that she is standing here and speaking to us and sharing these thoughts with us every day, multiple times a day, traveling to cities, listening to people, listening to their stories, sharing her thoughts, inspiring people every single day. They have built the car. The car is built. But you know what we give them? We get to give them the fuel for that car. And if they don't have the fuel for that car, think about the millions of people in this country who don't get to hear this profound voice because of this fucking media blackout. Pardon my French, probably shouldn't say that here. Clearly I'm passionate about it. The millions of people who must hear this voice. Do you know why they need to hear that voice? They need to hear this voice because just like all of us, she's speaking their thoughts. She's speaking this country's desires. She's speaking our needs. And when people hear what Marianne has to say, when they hear her not only talk about the vision, but the brilliance of how we get there and how she's going to do it, they go, that's my person. That's my candidate. You're here because of that too. And it's our responsibility to make sure that millions more Americans have that same experience where they then show up at these events. And that's up to us. And that takes our hard-earned money that we work for every single day to fuel the car that is this campaign. And there's a very special event. So firstly, thank you to everyone who's given to this campaign already. Because as Marianne said, polling at 11% is a huge deal. It is a huge deal. And this campaign is real, this campaign is serious, and it's because of the money that we've all put into the campaign so far that she's polling where she's at. And so here's another opportunity to give from your hearts. Tomorrow here in LA, there's going to be a very special, very intimate event with Marianne Williamson at a beautiful home in Beverly Hills. And we're asking everyone to dig deep, to give what you can, and to join this event. And so to join this event, it's a $500 contribution. Now, I know that's a lot of money. However, and if you can give that $500, please do tonight. But if you can't, and you can gather 4 other friends tonight, and each one of you can give $100 to her campaign, and I know for a lot of us that could even be a stretch. But if you can give $100 with 4 other people to that to the campaign tonight, all 5 of you get to go to this event together. That's super cool. I love this idea. It could be 2 people giving $250. It could be 2 people giving $300 and $200. You get the point. What matters is we dig deep, we give what we can, and then we give a little more, and then we give a little more. Because this is the person who's doing all the work. And the least that we can do is make sure that she has all the fuel to do it all the way to the White House. So, give what you can. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you, Marianne Williamson, for everything you are. We love you so much. Let's hear it for Marianne.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you to all of you. The only one thing I want to add is that I am working hard, but so are many other people. All of the wonderful, wonderful volunteers who put together tonight. Thank you to the singers. Thank you to you, Ryan, to you, Francis, to the incredible team that is this campaign, and all the volunteers all over the country, and all of you, even in other countries, who are spreading the word on social media. God bless you all. I know it's a sprint. We don't have a lot of time. These primaries start on January 24th with the vote in New Hampshire. That's a whole other story, but I don't need to bore you with it here. We'll talk about that tomorrow night if you want. All I need to say other than that is how much I love you, and thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you. Thank you.